Welcome to Charts Today. My name is David Linton, and today's edition for Thursday, the 23rd of May, comes to you from London. And we start by looking at the dollar. It's pushing higher, starting to nudge that high that we saw in April. So looking strong again. Good upside targets all round. So we are just seeing that dollar strength being the key in currency markets. We're seeing the euro sinking lower against the dollar. We've now got 5 downside targets. That's really telling us the likelihood is further falls to the euro against the dollar. And if we look at the dollar against the yen, we are actually down slightly today, but again, it's strong here, which is always a good lead indicator for what's going to happen. Looking at sterling, it's sinking lower against the dollar, sitting at 126, looking pretty bearish. The downside targets have been met on this short-term chart. Medium term, we still do have 2% lower, and long term, we have some pretty scary charting targets. So the political situation with Brexit is just weighing quite heavily there, so we are seeing bearish on all 3 time frames. Against the euro, we're weaker here as well, now just moving into medium term bearish territory. Short term, we do still have a further 1% downside there, so sterling is just weakening all the time there. Looking at the Swiss franc, we see sterling lower to 127, and against the Aussie dollar sinking lower there as well, 183. Bitcoin sitting at $7,500. Just looking a little bit toppy here on the medium-term chart. We're seeing this pattern on the daily, just looking a little bit like a double top, the failure to make a new high. So we just need to watch that. We are bearish on the short-term chart. We've got downside targets of about 2%, but at the moment it's bullish in the medium term, but bearish in the short and long term. The S&P index fell last night. We're just down slightly there, just struggling at this real resistance level. Just the high we saw last year, pretty much the same place. So stocks just struggling at that point, and that is a little bit worrying for the market. The Nasdaq, of course, did actually go higher this year than last year's high, but again, just struggling and falling there. And the Dow was down 0.39%. Again, just struggling to break to new highs. So this is looking quite toppy on that long-term chart. We've had 3 attempts to get through 27,000 over the last 2 years and failed. So quite interesting there. Looking at the Russell 2000, a failure to make a new high, pretty clear here. So smaller cap US stocks have been hit. Looking at the futures this morning, we see the E-mini future for the S&P down 0.7%. And the Nasdaq E-mini down nearly 1%, so it does suggest that US market will open lower, and trade war fears still weighing heavily on stocks. Looking at the FTSE 100 index, we're down 0.75% this morning. It's actually holding on to the medium-term bullish position, but still looking a little bit worrying on the short-term chart. And the same for the medium-term chart. In fact, we are pretty bearish here now on the short-term chart, a further downside potential. So we're seeing smaller cap stocks being hit. The DAX in Germany this morning down 1.3%. So that's really falling much lower, and the CAC 40 down 1.1%. So we are seeing again a fall away here too. Japan was down just over 1/3%. Overnight, and the Hang Seng was down 1.8%. So we are seeing again the sell-off really across Asia. We saw Chinese market down 1.4%, and Chinese stocks really have fallen, having hit that resistance on the weekly cloud. We really are falling away again. We've got downside targets here, just on the edge of activating a bigger downside target on the medium-term chart, some 20% lower. So Chinese stocks have had their recovery this year, but we've really retraced most half of that back. The bright spot is the Sensex. That's actually up 0.84%, bullish on all 3 time frames. Lots of upside targets. Still the strongest looking market going. Looking at the Aussie market, down 0.29%. But the chart's looking pretty bullish. It has broken to a clearer new high and has had a very good week this week. Brent crude sitting at $70.38, bearish on that short-term chart. The seasonal effect starting to lose its power, and we're seeing with the WTI chart much the same picture. No clear short-term downside targets there. US nat gas sitting at $2.55, so teetering along, just edging lower all the time, and we do still have these targets of 214, 225, and if we broke to new lows, 183. So really quite concerning there. Gold sitting at 1274, just struggling to move into short-term bullish despite all the global turmoil we're seeing at the moment. Gold is actually short-term bearish, and silver, we're seeing also a similar picture as you might expect. US 10-year yields sitting at 2.38%, bearish on all three time frames, so the outlook for yields is still negative. Taking a look at the individual stocks, we see here, if we look at the Dow Jones first, this is last night. Coca-Cola was the best performer, up 2%, and that chart looking pretty good. We've got good upside targets there all around, so Coke looking pretty good. On the downside, we have Apple. They were down 2%, and that's quite a big fall there for Apple. And Goldman Sachs were down 1.8%. Boeing's woes continue, down 1.6%, so looking lower there as well. In the Nasdaq, if we look at the best performers, was Renogen Pharmaceuticals. They were up 3%. Hasbro were up 2%. On the downside, we had Qualcomm down a massive 10%, and Tesla, their woes really continuing, falling below the $200 mark, sitting now at $192, down 6%, falling out of bed since they've broken that support level, which we've been talking about. They've underperformed the market this year by 44%, so we are just seeing quite a hit there. Looking at the Aussie market, the best performer was Infigen Energy, but the chart not looking great still. They were up 8%. On the downside, we had Aroka, they were down 6%. Again, chart not looking great. China, we saw a lot of sell-off there, and in India, the Nifty 50. Here we look at Adani Ports. They were the best performer, up 7%. Breaking into bullish territory on that weekly chart, so Adani starting to look good. Good upside targets there as well. And if we look, Z Entertainment, we're up 5%. Recovery underway, but not yet into bullish territory. And if we look at the downside, we had ITC Group down 2.9% and Ica Motor Limited down 2%. Taking a look at Europe now. We'll start by looking at the UK market. Down fairly heavily this morning, as we've already established. We've got a handful of stocks up. Hilco Pharmaceuticals up 1.69%. And chart pretty flatlining there. If we look at the downside, most of the pharma stocks actually up. So we had Hilco, AstraZeneca, Glaxo. When we look at GSK, we see here they are pushing higher. But again, flatlining most of the last 12 months. If we look at the worst performers, we've got TUI down 5%, Melrose down 4.5%, so we are seeing some quite big falls here as well. Looking at mid caps now, the UK market, Circa Group up nearly 8% this morning, so that's quite a jump there. And Quintech up 7.3%, also a good jump there. On the downside, we've got Royal Mail down a further 5%, not looking great. Just Group down nearly 5%. They've really fallen out of bed as well. Premier Oil also lower this morning, down nearly 4.5%. Quite a lot of stocks falling in those 4s, 3s, 2% area. Looking into the European market now, so the continental market, we've only got two stocks up. Sanofi and Paris up 0.76%, and Anheuser-Busch InBev, they are up 0.5%, so we are seeing a little bit of a performance there, but not great. L'Oreal flat, but an amazing looking chart still, one of the best looking charts going. And if we look at the downside, we can see Daimler, the worst performer, down 7% this morning. They've been hit quite hard. That's pushing them into medium-term bearish territory. But a lot of stocks falling away. We've got Vivendi down 2%, for example. CRH and Ireland down a further 2%. So not a great start to the day. Looking pretty bearish, the markets in the US set to open lower. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.